Welcome to T21Mom.
Hi, friends, and welcome back to the T21Mom podcast, where we connect through powerful personal stories, heartfelt experiences, and insightful conversations with experts and specialists. I'm Mary, proud mom to my daughter Ainsley, my amazing 11-year-old who has the dual diagnosis of Down syndrome and autism, and I am living life my way. Together, we're navigating life in our own unique way, and this is episode 142, and I'm so glad you're here. Today, we're diving deep into the raw and emotional journey of receiving a life-changing diagnosis. Joining me is Colleen Johnson, a mom whose story is both heart-wrenching and inspiring, from navigating the complexities of her older son's medical needs to the life-altering moment she learned her newborn son, Luke, had Down syndrome. Colleen describes the experience as feeling like swimming in jello, confusing, overwhelming, and heavy. Colleen doesn't shy away from sharing the grief that both she and her husband face, the struggles they've endured, and how, with time, they found a way to move forward. But she also sheds light on a painful truth. Even after all these years, the way a diagnosis is delivered often lacks compassion and care. This episode is a testament to resilience, love, and the power of sharing our stories. Join us as we hear Colleen's journey, the heartbreak, the hope, and the lessons she's learned along the way. You won't want to miss it. Today on the T21Mom podcast, we are continuing with the Down Syndrome Diaries, diagnosis stories. We all have a diagnosis story, and I feel so very privileged to be able to share these stories because I think they are so personal and so close to one's heart. And joining me today to share her story is Colleen Johnson. Welcome, Colleen.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're very welcome. So before we get started, why don't you tell us a little bit about you and your family?
Yeah, my husband, Jesse, and I have two boys. Eli is our older son. He is 5, and Luke is our youngest. He's 3, and he has Down syndrome. And we live in a suburb of Chicago. And yeah, it's been a wild ride.
Yeah, I bet your kids are still young, so I feel like you're kind of starting to get out of the trenches, still kind of in there, I think. But
Yes.
yeah, life is hectic, especially those first early years, I have always found. And I just had the one. So
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
wonderful. Now, you're like, as I just said, your kids are young, 5 and 3. And, probably life, well, I'm sure life is very busy. And you had a little bit of a rough start with your older son, Eli. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, when he was at his 4-month well visit, the pediatrician discovered a little lump in his diaper area and kind of scared us and said, hey, you need to immediately go to the hospital and get blood work done. This should not be here. We need to see what's going on. And so we did that, and everything was fine. And for a long time, he had this kind of undiagnosed lump, and this lump started getting bigger and bigger. And long story short, after a lot of testing and biopsies and MRIs and everything else under the sun, he was diagnosed with a lipoblastoma, which was benign, thank God. But essentially, it was this tumor in his diaper area that was huge. I mean, it was the size of, like a grapefruit.
Wow.
And in between this little, kid's legs. And so when he was about 18 months old, we had surgeries and things got delayed because of COVID. But when he was finally able to get this kind of tumor removed, he was 18 months old. So we were dealing with, medical complexities kind of right out of the gate. So that was really a scary, trying time. And I remember when we started trying to get pregnant for our second son, I just kept thinking like, oh, or second child, we didn't know it was going to be a boy. I was like, oh, I'm so, excited to have, a quote unquote normal, just experience of, without trauma, without doctor's appointments. I was just like, oh, what would that be like? I don't know. So yeah.
Different. And maybe not so much. And so before you had gone to the well visit, did you know that the tumor was there?
I didn't. It was, I guess you're so used to diaper changes and everything. It was so slight. It was like
Mm.
looks like one of his buttocks was just slightly bigger than the other one. And, thank God we had a good pediatrician who was on top of it and really noticed it. The nature of his tumor was such that whenever it would get bumped or hit, um, his surgeon described it as like a sponge soaking up sort of like fluid, so it would grow really
Mm.
rapidly. So when he turned a year old and started walking and was constantly falling on his bum, this thing kind of really took off and went from like a little, walnut-sized lump to this huge thing, you know. So it was, yeah, it was wild. It was really crazy. And like I said, thank God it was benign and
Mhm.
several checks ever since. And just this year, actually, so he's in kindergarten now. And I remember back when he was a baby, they said, we'll check him every 6 months until he's probably about in kindergarten. And then if everything checks out okay, he'll be officially discharged. So this last, just a few months ago, he got the official like, hey, you're good to go. We got it all. It's all gone. So that's huge.
Oh, that's wonderful. So obviously he doesn't need to be monitored the rest of his life. They monitored him
Thank
for those
God.
5 years. Oh,
Yep.
that's
5 years.
good.
Yeah.
Oh, good, good. Oh, that's great to hear. Now, as we were sort of chatting a bit back and forth, you did mention that your older son, Eli, he also has autism. When was that diagnosed?
So that was officially diagnosed just a few months before his third birthday. Again, it was a really hard diagnosis because of COVID, because of the trauma of
Mm.
this tumor and going into, he had been sedated quite a bit because they would do MRIs and biopsies to try to figure out what the thing was. I guess a lipoblastoma is pretty rare. So it was difficult for them to figure out what it was. And so for a long time, we were told, oh, it's just a speech delay. And, he didn't have a lot of social interaction because of COVID and this and that. And then as he got older, I just wanted to get a diagnosis. And I was pretty shocked because I truly did think it was a speech delay and to get that official diagnosis. And it was interesting. We actually got the Down syndrome diagnosis before the autism diagnosis.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So we got both diagnoses within 6 months of each other. But there was a period of time where it just felt like we kept getting, blow after blow of these big life-changing, mirrors.
Yes, most definitely, because that was going to be a question further along. Now, I can only imagine how stressful that was dealing with Eli's tumor, no one really knowing what it is, and seeing it's growing in size. I mean, and he's trying to learn to walk, like all these things. Like, and it's your first child, right? Just trying to learn parenthood. Forget about all the medical stuff. Right?
Totally. Totally.
And so your kids are 2 years apart. So obviously you didn't know about Eli's autism until after Luke, your second son, was born. But when you found out you were pregnant, like you were kind of talked a little bit about it, how were you feeling emotionally? You just have gone kind of through the ringer with
Yeah.
COVID. We're all dealing with the COVID stuff, but then yours was definitely more complex than a lot of people's because you're dealing with a new child, like a new baby, and all these medical issues. And then you get pregnant again with your second child. What was that like? Like, what were you feeling?
We had tried to get pregnant with our second one for almost a year before we actually got pregnant. And, anybody that's trying to conceive and having a hard time, it's just kind of all consuming. That's all you're thinking about. And
Mhm.
I was so excited to conceive. I was just like, oh, he's gonna have a sibling and this is gonna be so great. And I was really relieved for that. And then, Eli had, I'm trying to think of the timing of everything. So Eli turned a year right at the beginning of 2020. And then that's also when I got pregnant, was shortly after that. And Eli's tumor was removed in September of 2020.
Mhm.
And so then I got pregnant. Actually, I remember I found out I was pregnant with Luke on Christmas Eve of
Okay.
2020 because I put the pregnancy test in my husband's stocking.
Okay.
Remember that. So that's when I got pregnant with Luke was I found out on Christmas Eve. So it was definitely a relief because it was like, oh, this thing is out of our lives. We don't have to deal with it anymore. We're going to move on from that. COVID was also not such a, scary thing at that point. And we had just a lot of big changes. We moved. So it was just a lot going on in our lives. And I just, I was just over the moon to be pregnant.
That's wonderful. And you mentioned that your two pregnancies were quite different, which I have often heard actually. And can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, it is so interesting how so my older son Eli was like so textbook. My first trimester, I was sick as a dog. I was throwing like, 3 times a day. And then it was like, ooh, the second I entered in the second semester, and morning sickness went away. I was really happy. I was measuring perfect the whole pregnancy. It was just so textbook. Everything was glorious until Eli was just a hair premature. He was born at 36 weeks and 1 day.
Mhm.
My water broke in the middle of this huge Chicago snowstorm. It was like out of a movie. My husband had to drive me to the hospital, and we got to the hospital at 6:15, and Eli was delivered at 6:45. Like, I was pushed with snow boots on. It was truly like out of a movie. It was one. And so, but he came out and they said, oh, he's, a smidge early, but he's doing great. And put him on my chest. Everything was fine. He had no NICU time. He had no need for anything. He was just fine. And then Luke's pregnancy, my son with Down syndrome, was very easy in comparison. I think I might have gotten sick with him maybe a couple of times. I felt a little nauseous, but I was never like, throwing up all the time. And it was just pretty chill and relaxed. Luke was also incredibly active inside my belly. He was always just kick, 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 kick all the time. And I had no indication anything was wrong until that 20-week scan.
So what happened at the 20-week scan?
So we went in, and of course, I was just like, oh, I'm so excited to find out the gender of my baby. I thought, oh, there's no need to think of any, why would anything else be going on? So we went in, and the gal who was, doing the test, she did tell us like, hey, it's a boy, he's going to have a brother. And we were excited. And everything else, she said, you know what? He has short, long bones. And that's all she said. And then she said, but she goes, you know what? He's moving so much inside of you. I can't really get a good read. So we're going to send you to MFM, maternal fetal medicine, and have them check you again because I'm just not getting a good read. And I was like, oh, okay. And that was pretty much it. It was really, she seemed very nonchalant about it. Like, oh, you're going to get, just another ultrasound done and we'll figure that out. So I went to MFM and they did a slew of tests and it was the same thing. I remember them telling me, well, his long bones are measuring short, but and they said something along the lines of like, that could indicate some sort of a chromosomal abnormality, but almost always there's other things that go with it. There's heart defects or the neck fold, or their hands don't open up so many times. That's why they have the simian crease. And your son has none of those things. She would measure how many times he would open his hand in like 30 seconds, and he would, do it so many times and no other indications. So actually, we had several tests done, and my cord was not coiled. It was, and that was almost more of a concern than anything. Randomly, spontaneously, I think maybe at 30 weeks, my cord coiled on its own. So they were like, everything is going fine. Every one of our tests is fine, except for these short, long bones. They actually were kind of gearing me towards like dwarfism.
Oh,
That
really?
was brought up to me. They said, that is a potential. But again, they said, likely he's just going to be kind of like on the shorter side. My husband's mother is petite, and they said, maybe he'll just take after her and be kind of short. And that was really how they left it with me. I was offered the NIPT test?
Yeah. Yeah. I was going to ask about that because it's readily available now. When my daughter's will be 12 next month, hadn't come into Canada yet. It was just starting. So, yeah. So did they offer that to you, or?
So at the time, it was, it's like 8-week per appointment. And I remember the doctor saying like, hey, we could do this, but because I was under 35, my insurance wouldn't cover it.
Okay.
They covered it for like 35 and over. And I just remember, again, I was just so naive, and I thought, oh, there's nothing, nothing runs in my family. We should be fine. And so I thought, well, shoot, we'll save a couple $100 and not do it. Insurance didn't pay for it. So I opted out of the NIPT test. And then when I was doing all these testings with maternal fetal medicine, I remember her saying, well, we could go in and do is it the amniocentesis?
Yeah.
And she said, well, we could do that, but it was kind of the understanding of, well, we might not get the results back before you deliver, A, and B, it's not going to change anything. I think her implication was like, if we get the results back and there is a abnormality, you can't do anything about it, So kind of well, why worry yourself? It was very much kind of frowned. She was like, you really shouldn't do it. Like, there's for it. And I was following her guidance, and I was like, oh, okay. Yeah, we won't. And plus there's, some risk involved.
Of course.
So I thought, well, yeah, we won't risk anything.
Okay, that's interesting about, they could see the short, long bones, which, as we all know now.
Right. Yeah. Huge.
Pretty heavy indicator of Down syndrome. But, my daughter didn't have any of those except the nuchal fold. I even had one tech I don't even know what scan it was that I was there for. And she goes like, why are you here? And then I already knew that she had Down syndrome. And then she told me later, I said, I've been doing this for 20 years. And unless you had told me, I would not have known.
Yeah, what?
Yeah. And I've heard that many times. There's sometimes you will get like, there's a short, long bone is an obvious sign. But, a no nasal bone is another. But a lot of factors are in that, like depending on your heritage, if you have some Asian heritage in you, it might not show. So, yeah, it's really only the amnio will 100% confirm. And I did have one lady on who had the NIPT, and it came back fine. And then she had a birth diagnosis.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I think I've only heard of, I think 2, her being one, and I think one other, maybe 3 in total that has happened, because it's not 100% guaranteed, the NIPT, right? It's just highly accurate, because then obviously if it's positive, and if you really want to know, you can go do an amnio and stuff, right? But yeah, I'm just surprised they kind of dissuaded you from that. But
Yeah.
it is what it is. So
In hindsight, it is very interesting how it all kind of went down.
now, like Luke, you said, was a preemie at 33 weeks and 5 days. So, 6 weeks early, kind of, a little early. So how much did he weigh?
He was 4 pounds, 8 ounces. He was the little
Was that? Yeah. That's our guys
He's-
tend to be little.
yeah. He was pretty small.
Because they got to get to, I think, 5 pounds before they can leave the hospital. So
Right.
you weren't
Right.
too far off that.
Yeah.
So, and so why did you end up having, like, okay, you also mentioned that you had to have a C-section. So so what happened there?
So just like my other pregnancy, it was in the middle of the night and my water broke. And that week prior, I had actually gone into the hospital because my mucus plug had come out. And I would wipe and there would be just a twinge of blood. And I thought, oh, I need to, get this checked out. And I went in and they did a test and they said, well, you're totally closed and there's no amniotic fluid. So they sent me home. And then lo and behold, and a few days later in the middle of the night, water broke again. It was like out of a movie. It was just this gush of water all over the 30 in the morning. I was like hitting my husband, wake up. Quit. And he was like, oh my gosh, there's so much water on the floor. What's going on? And so we had a toddler. So I said, okay, you stay here. It's the middle of the night. You stay here with Eli. He's sleeping. I'll drive myself to the hospital. So I drove myself to the emergency room and I go in there and clearly my water had broken. My pants were just soaking wet, but she goes, well, we need to test you and make sure it's amniotic. And I said, okay. So I get into the triage room and like I said, that just a few days earlier when I had been there because of my mucus plug, they had done an ultrasound and they said, hey, he's head down. He's good to go. Like, you're great. And so I told the nurse, I said, hey, I just had an ultrasound done and he was, in the birth canal. We were ready to go. And she goes, okay, well, let's just do another one just to make sure. And she put the ultrasound, on my belly. And sure enough, he was breech. He had shifted.
He'd shifted. Oh no.
It is a breech position. And she just looked at me and I could tell by the look on her face. She goes, I'm so sorry, but he's breech. And my heart sank. I thought, oh no. And I knew what that meant because I really wanted to avoid a C-section. I had just heard that the recovery was horrible. And it was horrible. But anyway, so that's why he ended up needing to be breech. And they kept me in the hospital so my water broke at 33 and 5 days, and he was delivered at 34 days. So that night
Or
when I
34
came,
weeks.
or 34 weeks, thank you,
Yeah.
sorry. They gave me a shot in my butt,
For the lungs. Yeah.
exactly. And they said, okay, if you can make it another 24 hours, we're going to give you another shot to help his lungs develop. And that night, I was, they had admitted me. I was in the bed. And I remember at one point there was like 5 nurses ran into the room and they said, okay, turn on your side. Now turn on your other side. Now get on all fours. And heart rate had dropped.
Mhm.
And then spontaneously, again, I had to lay on my left side for 2 days straight because if I shifted, his heart rate would drop. But if I stayed on my left side, for whatever reason, he was fine.
Wow.
So that was kind of that whole experience. And then they scheduled the C-section for the morning at 34 weeks. And at this point, again, I still had no indication. I knew that, I knew he was going to have NICU time because he was early. And I could just tell it in my gut. I was like, something is not right, And I remember I was in the operation room and I told my husband was next to me and I kept telling him, oh, tell me jokes. I just wanted to get my mind off of like what was happening. And she took Luke out, and the way that it was set up, there was a blue curtain in front of this little cutout window. It was like, just a tiny, maybe, I don't know, 6x6 window. And so right when she pulled Luke out, she held him up at this window for what seemed like forever. It was probably just a few seconds, but I remember thinking, okay, cool. I'm glad you got him out, but like, make sure he's okay. Like, take him to where he needs to be. But she held him through this little window. And I remember in that brief moment looking at him and just thinking, he doesn't look like what I thought he was going to look like. And that was my only kind of fleeting thought, but it was so fleeting. And then, the NICU team kind of took over, and I heard just the tiniest, it sounded like a little lamb. It was like, there's this little cry. And I thought, okay, thank God he cried. We're good. And then the NICU team bundled him up. And then one more time before they took him away, they kind of said, okay, Mom. And they showed him, wrapped up in the cloth and said, we're going to go up to the NICU. We'll see you later. And I told my husband, who was next to me, I said, you go be with Luke, I'm fine. And they finished stitching me up, and he went up to the NICU with the baby.
Wow. Yeah. I also had a C-section. My recovery was actually a breeze, to be honest.
Oh, that's wow.
You don't hear that very often, but I do remember them holding her over because I didn't know if it was the boy or girl. And my friend was with me, and we're going like, what is it? There's all these cords and stuff, right? And, but I didn't hear her cry, and that made me nervous initially. So yeah, so I can totally understand that. So you've only had a brief glimpse. You haven't even held him. It's a boy. And then, like, what happened after that?
So they finished stitching me up, and they wheeled me next door to the operation room. It was like this recovery room. And it was kind of a bigger room. There was a curtain, and there was a nurse that was assigned to me. And pretty much right away, she said, okay, we got to get, you got a NICU baby. We got to get you pumping. And she hooked me up to those pumps like right away. I mean, it's after surgery. And I was like, okay. Right next to me there was like a wheelie cart, I think, with, some personal items. And so I'm pumping away, and she's like, oh, look at all this colostrum. You've got that great job. And then, I was just like, oh, okay. And so then, I don't know, maybe 20 minutes or so went by, and my husband came back down, and he was on cloud nine. He was like, oh, he's so cute. And like, he's doing really great. He just, I guess, he had a little bit of oxygen, but he really, barely needed oxygen, and he was doing really great. And he had taken some pictures, but he was just really happy, and he thought, everything was great. And then maybe 5 minutes after my husband came down, one of the NICU doctors came down. And almost immediately when I saw this doctor, I knew something was up. She was very kind of solemn and stoic. It was neither good nor bad. And she had this, dark brown brunette hair. I don't remember her name. And she came into the room, and she pulled up a chair, and she got a chair for my husband. So I'm laying on this bed attached to pumping machine sheets. And my husband is to the left of me in a chair by my head, and the doctor is sitting in another chair in front of my husband. And she kind of puts her hands in her lap, and she says, I don't like to tell parents this in the operating room. And immediately after she said that statement, I thought, oh, here we go. And she said, but we suspect that your son has Down syndrome. And the first thing out of my mouth was, well, are you sure? And she said, we're 99% sure. And it really felt like an out-of-body experience. It felt like I was swimming through jello. Like time was like, like this, like slowed down speed. She proceeded to tell us, like, there's different types of Down syndrome. There's the mosaicism, and she was explaining, and she goes, and we suspect that he has trisomy 21 and this, that, and the other thing, but we need to do this FISH test to be 100% sure. So we're going to take some blood. And she kind of did that. And I remember like nodding and listening to her, and just like tears were streaming down her face. And then she just kind of said, okay, we're all here for you, and I'm going to, let you two be together. And she left. And I was almost like scared to look at my husband. I remember at some point in this conversation, the nurse had come by and removed the pumping equipment from me, thank God. And I turned to my husband, and he was, I mean, he was really broken. He looked completely devastated. And I think the first thing he said was, "Oh, he's going to live with us the rest of his life." And I said, "No, it's going to be it's going to be okay." And he was like, "I don't know." And then he said, "I need to take a minute. I'm going to go grab a cup of coffee and I just need to take a minute to be to myself." And I was like, "Okay, if that's what you need. It's going to be okay." So he gave me a kiss on the cheek and went and got himself a cup of coffee. And I remember there was a time I just was sitting on this bed. My bags and things were away from me. I didn't have my phone. I had nothing. And I just was sitting there kind of staring at a wall and I just wept. I just cried. And that was how the news, I guess, semi was broken to us. We didn't officially know. And there was definitely a couple days that I held on to, like, well, maybe he doesn't.
Mhm.
But then after, I don't know how long it was, maybe an hour or so, they wheeled me to my room, and then they transferred me to a wheelchair and said, "Okay, we're going to take you so you can go see him." And he was in an incubator, and he was laying on his stomach, and he had, the little oxygen in his nose, and he was laying on, like, his head was turned to the side. And I remember looking at him, and I remember thinking, "Oh, I'm never not going to see it." And I don't know how that sounds now, but that's
Mhm.
going through my head at the time.
Mhm.
Was like, because I thought of how my husband had that moment where he was so happy and excited. And I was like, oh, like, because I knew when you looked at him, I could tell.
Mhm.
Like, yeah.
That's hard. Like, could they not have waited till you got out of the operating room and didn't have, like, the breast pumps on you? And, because, like, what I keep saying over and over, like, this is life-altering news
Right.
that these doctors are delivering. I get it. They're busy, and, they do need to share that information with you. But you and your husband are going to remember that moment for the rest of your life. And, that you had the breast pump on you and exactly where she was sitting. And, you remember all of that and how she told you that news. And yeah, and I remember, like you, and I knew ahead of time, like, I'm never not going to see it, but that does go away.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. So, but for some people, it just takes longer. And then how long was your husband away for? Like, how long did he go off for?
I think he said that he went and sat in, like, they have like a little, I don't know, garden area. I think he sat and cried, and I think he called his brother.
Mm.
Uh, so he was gone for, I don't know, maybe 30 minutes or so. It wasn't terribly long. Now, we also, had a toddler at home. So I think the plan all along was for him to, he was there for the birth, and he was kind of like, okay, he couldn't do anything for Luke in the NICU.
Mhm.
I think he was needing to snuggle with our toddler. And I think shortly, the rest of that day feels like such a blur. I remember, I think he ended up going home to be with Eli. I remember I was like, "Oh my gosh, I've gotta tell my parents." And telling my parents was, I ended up having a phone, it was just over the phone, and I said, "Mom, I think they think that he has Down syndrome." And my mom was just like, "Oh, okay." And I remember thinking, "What do you mean? Oh, pray this." She was down. She was just like, "That's fine. He's gonna be fine." Like, it was so just like,
Mhm.
well, then anyway, it doesn't matter,
Mm.
and it was a little more of a shock to my dad. And but I found out later, there was a whole team of neonatologists, at the hospital that take care of the different babies. And one of them had said to me, because they were like, "Oh, this is a birth diagnosis. Like, we're surprised that, this was a shock to you. And I said, yeah, we all these tests done. Nobody it's up to me. And apparently one of the neonatologists in the operation room before Luke was delivered said, hey, I was reading over her chart. I bet this kid's gonna have Down syndrome. He like nudged his partner, like wink, wink, nudge, nudge. I bet this kid's gonna have Down syndrome. And I remember hearing that and saying, oh my gosh, if that is what you thought, how was that not relayed to me? How did I not know about that?
Did you hear the doctor say that?
I did not hear him say it, but after
He told
one,
me.
he told me, he said, oh yeah, I called it. Like I knew that this is what was going to happen. And it just was so frustrating to think that for whatever reason, the MFM didn't catch it and didn't mention it and didn't say, hey, this is a strong possibility or even,
Mhm.
No, that was wild. And then really, I would say it was very much like a solemn kind of like I didn't get really the congratulate. It was like, how you doing? Are you okay? Just a very down and you would have on the way to the NICU, you would pass the mother and baby unit where you would see, the moms with their babies in the room and the first bath and all that stuff. And I remember just I would always have to close my eyes because I couldn't see others and knowing that my baby was just struggling to be there. That was rough. And then I did have one gal come into my room. She was with like the psych department and she kind of said like, hey, this is protocol that we, anybody that gets a diagnosis for something, we come to talk. And she was a little, I was crying, not to mention I got this diagnosis, but I'm, freshly postpartum, sounds crazy. And I'm crying. And one point she said like, you got to really pull yourself together because you don't want to, wind up in a psych department. You got a baby to take care of. And I remember, again, in the moment, I was such a, yeah, you're right. Okay, good. But now in hindsight, when I look back on that moment, I think, oh my gosh, how dare you say that to a mother ever
Yeah.
for any reason?
Yeah.
Like, just let us feed, so that was pretty wild too.
And how long was that after Luke had
I
been
mean,
born?
maybe 24 hours.
Like within a day? Wow. No. Oh my gosh. That's really crazy. And I think, in this, because Luke is only 3. Yeah. I'm really shocked to hear that you had all those tests done and no one even, like there was that one suggestion it could indicate some kind of difference, but there's all these other signs that indicate no. But
It was so poo-pooed on. Yeah. It was so like, oh no. Yeah.
because they're thinking, one, you're young, and because that's the myth that it's only older women like myself that are having kids with Down syndrome, which is not the case. It's majority of our kids are born to women under 35 because they're the ones who are having children.
Yeah.
So did you ever go back to the MFM and, I don't know, like complain or just let them know?
About it. Yeah. I had really thought about it. And I think, I remember I kind of complained like to my gynecologist office who works really closely with the MFM. I just remember kind of saying to them like, how did this happen? How did this slip through the cracks? And instead of complain, I more so was trying to like educate them like, please don't do this to someone else. Let's give all of the facts. Let's give all of the possibilities because you don't know unless, like you said, you have that definitive test. And also like maybe not convince people that they don't need to take these tests. I don't know. I guess it was just like the perfect sort of storm for me where that's just how it ended up working itself out. But yeah.
Yeah, that's, I think, tough.
Even
And so Eli, he'd had, like, as you said, kind of some medical trauma in his early life. And now you've learned, kind of not in a great way, that your second son has Down syndrome. I mean, you've kind of touched on it, but like, what were your emotions like at this time? Like, how was your mama's heart?
Yeah. It was really that feeling of like, oh my God, we're doing this again. With Eli, it was just like, if you're a medical parent, you know that there's all of the it's the stuff that nobody wants to talk about. It's the calling insurance 20 times a day to check on this, that, and the other thing, and the making of the appointments and driving to the appointments and then writing down every single symptom of this, that, and the other thing. And I just remember thinking, oh, like, not only have I got a child with a diagnosis that I had not really known anyone. I had known an acquaintance that had Down syndrome, but Down syndrome was not in my world. It was just brand new, stuff to learn. And then also a preemie, like a NICU, little teeny baby. In addition to that, it was just all of these things compiling. And then he had failed his newborn hearing test as well, which again, they sort of poo-pooed and said, oh, it's super common. Babies fail it all the time. You'll go, after he gets discharged, you'll go to an audiologist and they'll do another test on him. So I had all these things coming at me that were just like negative, like, oh. So it was definitely, it was traumatizing for me too. I was definitely shell shocked for a while.
Yeah, I can imagine. And how long was he in the NICU for?
For just under 6 weeks. I think he
Okay.
directed me to NICU just right before his due
Due
date.
date. Yeah, that's a while. I mean, Ainsley was on time, but we were in the hospital for 26 days and that nearly killed me. So yeah, and kind of like C-section, low oxygen saturation levels, like they can never figure out why, but they just, because she was a big baby, 9-1. Who would have thought? Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
I wasn't expecting that for sure. It's like I thought, oh, maybe 7 pounds, but definitely not 9-1. And, they just, all these tests, like you said. And I mean, I didn't have the trauma of the birth diagnosis. I'd already kind of dealt with that. But, it's hard when you're like, they couldn't figure out, we're going back and forth to the different hospitals. And then they finally just said, oh, it's just, she didn't get that opportunity to push out the fluids because it was a C-section and being a big baby. And she was like very low tone.
Did she eat okay?
Feeding, I did try breastfeeding. It was hard. I didn't find out until she was 2.5 that she had quite a severe lip tie, which can really impact breastfeeding. It was the dentist that caught that. Meanwhile, we'd seen a lactation doctor or a breastfeeding doctor, a lactation consultant. We'd had all these specialists. Nobody bothered to look at her mouth.
Right.
It's Down syndrome, that's what, and as I'm sure a lot of us parents with our kids, the feeding was hard. It would be like an hour to get like a little bottle, and then like it would just take forever. Whereas I think most babies, it would be 10 minutes or whatever. It was horrible and they're so sleepy. She would fall asleep trying to keep her awake. You probably experienced the same. It was hard. The first 2 months were definitely hard. And then just being in the hospital for 26 days and I was on my own. It was hard.
Oh,
Now, Luke is only 3. So you're still, in my opinion, relatively new to the journey. But how are you doing with all of this? I mean, you've had a lot go on in the last 3 years, really. Well, 5, but yeah.
thanks for asking. It's really nice when people ask about parents too, because our kids are so special and they're so, they need so much, and it is so crucial to make sure that the caregivers are being cared for too. I am every day. I think it gets better and it gets easier. I remember being so shell shocked and bringing Luke home and being terrified that I wasn't going to know how to parent him.
And
And then it was right. So he was born at the end of July, and right before Christmas, after a feeding, he looked at me and he smiled for the first time. And that was truly one of the first times that my shoulders kind of relaxed and I kind of thought, oh, okay, it's going to be okay. And it just continued to get a little bit better every day. Right now, I think I'm in the best place I have been in for a while. It's always, I think there's always a little bit of trauma. My husband and I almost about it of like, when things start going good, we're like, okay, when the ball gonna drop? When is it gonna happen? But no, we're doing pretty good.
Oh, that's good to hear. That's good to hear. Now, you mentioned that both boys are in school. So with Eli, is he in kindergarten?
Yeah, even kindergarten.
Oh, that's great. And Luke, I guess, like preschool or I don't know what it is.
Yeah.
And that's fantastic. And so how is that all going? Is Luke still in early intervention or?
He has stopped. So the way that early intervention works in Illinois is on the child's third birthday, they graduate from early intervention and then they join the school district, school program at the school district. Luke does actually have a hearing loss. So we are in the hard of hearing program at Luke's preschool, which is, we're so lucky that he has a program like that. And so, yeah, he's a little guy still. I mean, he just looks little. He's not quite walking yet. He took his first steps just a few weeks ago, actually.
Fantastic. Okay.
But to put this, little guy on a school bus in the morning and strap him in and say, okay, bye, see you in a couple hours is kind of bizarre, the very jarring feeling, but he really likes it. He sees the school bus coming and he gets a big smile and he gets him. So it's good.
Oh, that's awesome. Ainsley was a late walker too. She didn't, she took her first steps like just before her fourth birthday. And then at her fourth birthday was walking all over at her party, never did it again. And yeah, so it was a few months after, like she would walk holding my hand, but she would never do it independently. And for a year, we worked on that. I took her to our amazing physio. She had her walking in 3 weeks. It was amazing.
Isn't that so wild? He graduated early intervention, started a new PT at preschool, and then we also have outside like PT and just the set of eyes on our kids and different things. Yeah, it's very cool.
He'll get there. He'll get there. That was, though, the hardest milestone for me was the walking. That almost killed me. But he'll get there. We just have to be patient with our kids.
No.
So do you think it was better for you to have a birth diagnosis, or do you think you would have preferred a prenatal diagnosis?
I have thought about that so many times. And at the end of the day, I tell myself I am glad that it happened the way it did and it happened, the birth diagnosis. I think if I would have known beforehand, I would have grappled with, because I will say this whole experience has almost been harder on my husband than myself. And I think having to make a decision of, if we go ahead with this and maybe my husband would have resented me, I don't know. Or like, and then if we don't go through with this birth, could I live with myself? And having those thoughts, I'm glad that it happened the way it did. And the decision was kind of made for me.
For her.
Yeah.
Almost everyone I've ever asked, I think, with the exception of one, I think, prefer how they got their divorce. Really? Maybe two. But yeah, most people prefer how they get it. Yeah. Mostly for the same, like who had birth diagnosis, mostly for the same reasons that you said. Didn't want to worry during the pregnancy and just everything else that comes with that. And what would you tell someone who has just learned that their baby either prenatally or at birth has Down syndrome?
Please experience every emotion that you need to experience. Don't feel like you need to feel a certain way about anything. Like every emotion is valid, and you can just please feel those emotions and go through them. I will say one of the biggest things that helped me, like right out of the gate, was going on Instagram and looking at other families that had kids with Down syndrome and seeing these kids just like living their best life and being so happy and just like running and playing and doing what kids do. I just remember staying up at 3 in the morning pumping because Luke was, I pumped exclusively for him.
Mhm.
And so every 3 hours getting up at night pumping, and I would just scroll different Down syndrome accounts on Instagram, and just it really helped. It was like a balm on my heart. I was like, okay, it is okay. It's gonna be okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was helpful.
Oh, that's great. And what is the greatest thing that Luke has taught you?
I love him so much. He's taught me so many things. Patience. Patience is something that I am not the patience person by nature at all. And patience, I think, is a gift. And he has taught me to be patient. He also has taught me that, life isn't about trophies, and it's not about coming in first place or, you know, booking a job from an audition. It's about the joy that you experience and how you make others feel, and just being happy and enjoying your life and having that mindset shift of like, it's just about the joy, you know.
Oh, I like that. That's wonderful. And is there anything else you would like to share?
I mean, thank you so much for this experience. It's really lovely to be able to kind of go back in time and remember these moments. And yeah, to anyone who's got a, special kiddo, just, we really are so lucky, and they're wonderful. And yeah, it's just so fun.
That's awesome. That's wonderful. And I know like Luke's only 3. You got lots of wonderful years ahead of you. And, I look forward to hearing about him walking and running. And I remember shortly after Ainsley started to walk, she took off at me at Costco. I was happy.
Like, oh, it's like amazing. When Eli started talking, I was like, I mean, I don't care what you say. You say a bad word, I don't like use talking, it's just, yeah, every tiny little, my friends call them inch stones instead of milestones. I think so every inch stone matters.
Yes, I like that inch stone. Yeah, that is totally what it is. And we all always celebrate big in our community, as I'm sure you've discovered, because they work so hard to get to those inch stones. So
Yeah. And
well, Colleen, thank you so much for coming on today and sharing your story. It's nice to hear from moms whose kids are on the younger side. So, like a lot of people, their kids are a bit older. So it's really nice to hear from someone whose kids just coming into this journey. So thank you so much.
pretty fun. Thank you so much. Luke's on Instagram at Our Life with Luke. He's got you can see him in his little journey. He's the cutest little guy. So yeah.
Oh, for sure. We'll put that in the show notes for sure.
Oh.
Our Life with Luke. Oh, that's wonderful. In this heartfelt episode that I sat down with Colleen, with a mom whose journey has been filled with both challenges and profound love. Little Luke is just 3 years old, and yet it's disheartening to hear that so much hasn't changed in how a Down syndrome diagnosis is shared with families. Some of the moments that kind of really stayed with me. Number 1, the shock that Colleen's prenatal scans showed signs, yet these were dismissed. While an ER doctor could immediately recognize what others had overlooked, he called it. He predicted that she would have a baby with Down syndrome. And as I'm sure we all know, Short, long bones is a very strong indicator for Down syndrome. May not always be, but it's a strong indicator. And even though she was under the age of 35, she should have been offered testing for it if that's what she chose to do. And secondly, the image of the doctor delivering Luke's diagnosis, just being very solemn, very stoic, and yet where was the reassurance? Where was the joy? Colleen had just welcomed her baby, and every baby deserves celebration. And number 3, which I hear time and time again, the sheer absence of congratulations, the solemn faces, and the overwhelming message that somehow Luke's diagnosis overshadowed the miracle of his birth. Colleen shares wisdom that really stayed with me. Let yourself feel every emotion you need to feel. Getting your child's diagnosis, this is a profound, life-changing moment, and suppressing your emotions won't serve you or your child. Her courage in sharing the painful memory of being told by a staff member to get it together is a stark reminder of how far we still need to go in creating compassionate spaces for our families. But amidst this hurt, there is beauty. Colleen's mother's calm and unwavering love is a powerful reminder that a diagnosis doesn't define our children. It's love that does. And when Colleen admitted her fear that she might never not be able to see it, I felt that really deeply. It was very powerful to me because I was there one time too, as I'm sure many of you have been as well. And I thought I would never not be able to see it. But I think we all know that that's just not true. So many of us have been there, but in time we see beyond the diagnosis to the beautiful, unique child that's in front of us. Colleen's story is one of resilience, hope, and unconditional love. I hope her journey inspires you as much as it did me. Be sure to follow her on her Instagram at Our Life with Luke for more of her family's story. And I'll be sure to put that in the show notes. And thanks for listening to the T21Mom podcast. If this episode resonated with you, please give it a like and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And keep spreading the love for our incredible Rockin' kiddos. So keep on loving on your Rockin' kiddos, and I'll see you next time.